And I think we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from wherever you're joining us from. I'm Andrew from Salesforce Ben, the technical instructor here, and I'm going to be your host for today. Um, Hope that's okay. If not, you're a bit stuck. I'm just going to leave it a few minutes for everyone to join us. But yeah, for the time being, feel free to jump in on the chat and let us know where you're joining us from.
Is chat enabled, Andrew? Somebody's saying it looks like it might
Yeah,
not.
I've just seen that. Apparently, it is disabled, which is not ideal considering I've just asked people to jump in there. Um, Let me get that sorted. While I'm getting that sorted, just a bit of housekeeping around any questions. We do have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So if you can um, use the Q&A box for any questions that you might have, um, so just we can keep track of them and make sure that they get answered and don't get lost. Cool. I think that is enough time. So let me introduce our panel for our session today. So I am joined by Connor Casey, lead software engineer, sorry, at WithSecure, Graham Smith, Global Alliances Leader at WithSecure, and Andrew Hart, VP of Services at Own Company. Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks everyone for joining. Let's get started. Today, this is what we're going to cover. Connor, Andrew, and myself are going to have a conversation around these four areas, give you some clarity on Salesforce threats, things that we see at WithSecure and at Own pertaining to that. But also, really importantly, talk about all the excellent security tools that you get out of the box as a Salesforce customer. Really want to focus on the security benefits of using Salesforce. Get clear on who's actually responsible when it comes to Salesforce security, and talk about something called the shared responsibility model that governs that. Move on to a practical discussion around the good security outcomes that Salesforce customers are getting, and to share some of the success stories that we've seen at WithSecure and Own around that. And finally, leave you and your organization with some practical takeaways, so some Salesforce security best practice for you to take back to your organizations. So let's talk firstly around threats, and turning to you, Connor. Firstly, what are the current internal and external threats that you see at WithSecure around Salesforce environments, please?
Yeah, of course, and it's great to be here with everyone today. So outside of the sort of foundational security aspects, when I think about Salesforce from a threat perspective, I tend to kind of bucket it into these two buckets, so internal and external threats. Now, internal threats generally entails, more so kind of human errors, things like misconfiguration, development errors. Every company, uses Salesforce in such a unique way, and that's really the brilliance, as most people here probably know, of the Salesforce platform. But that also means that every company has different considerations when it comes to security. They need to make sure that they keep up with the Salesforce release schedule and product updates, and understand the implications that those things have on their unique deployments. So those are kind of the internal threats from a security perspective that I typically think of. And then the second bucket of external threats, Salesforce is a platform that's built for speed. It's built for engagement. So Service Cloud, is designed for efficiency, but with that speed can come risk, right? So when it comes to external threats, I always tell customers that they need to take the guesswork out of security for their end users. So make sure that they can only see and share the data that they're supposed to see and share. Make sure that they don't need to worry about opening an attachment that a customer sent. External threats like phishing attempts, ransomware, those are very real threats, right? So mitigating those types of risks from a system level is really what allows you, I think, to take advantage of Salesforce's full potential.
Hey, thanks, Connor. Andrew, same question to yourself.
Yeah, I think I'd echo a lot of what Connor said there. We know at Own that most incidents, if I can use that word, it's slightly loaded word, but from data loss to corruption to introducing attack vectors or vulnerabilities are a result of human error. It's a bit more nuanced than that, obviously. Some users, in fact, the vast majority of users are over-provisioned in Salesforce in some way, be it data access or feature access. Another thing, looking to the internal bucket, is integration setups are often more open than they need to be. They don't follow the principle of least privileges. People don't take the time to tighten up integration because it is time intensive and it introduces errors in its initiative process. And when it comes to deployment, changing your application, introducing configuration, customizations, security is often an afterthought for a piece of code or a plugin. Just one other thing I'll add, just it's not all around setup. Often users aren't properly enabled to use a system, so the training isn't refreshed over time as the system changes, or the application perhaps isn't intuitive for a certain use case, and that introduces risks as well in terms of where data is placed and how people actually interact with what's being designed.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question we're going to tackle is how are threats evolving? When it comes to the cloud with Secure, it's pretty clear that what we see is cyber criminals using legitimate access and legitimate functionality on the cloud. And Salesforce really does allow that. So if you're allowing your customers access to your Salesforce cloud through Service Cloud or Experience Cloud, allowing customers and partners access, and then having things like legitimate functionality, so email to case, web to case, allows these external users to send files and URLs and emails. So that's how we see perhaps the threats evolving, relating to Salesforce. Andrew, Connor, anything that you want to add here yourselves?
Yeah, I think in terms of how these things are evolving, obviously everybody is very rightfully focused on AI, and I think that's in the cybersecurity space and just obviously tech and kind of globally in general. Because AI can be used now to generate ransomware more quickly and effectively. It can be used to write malicious code. And I think when it comes to AI, there's a lot to be considered, both kind of on the front of what information you're feeding into AI models. So thinking about it from kind of a compliance perspective more so. And then also what information you're taking from these models. So that's kind of more on the security front. So if I'm a sales rep or a service agent and I'm getting information from ChatGPT or Einstein Copilot or some other sort of AI model, right? How do we ensure that those things aren't malicious? And then outside of kind of the AI bucket, I think I would just echo kind of what I said earlier about the Salesforce platform and ecosystem growing in complexity. And it's important to have, follow proper release readiness and testing protocols to make sure that your security posture is maintained as you build and expand on the platform. Because, your platform today can look entirely different in just a few months. So it's important to stay up to date with the latest threats and trends and make sure that you are, you have systems and processes in place to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It might not be that the threat's evolving. It might just be that it's your own use of Salesforce that's evolving that maybe brings about new risks. So yeah, some really good points there. Andrew, turning to you, let's talk about some good news, some good things that are available when it comes to security. What Salesforce provided security tools give customers a sound foundation when it comes to security?
Yeah, it's a great point, and we mustn't forget that Salesforce as a platform fundamentally is a secure place to play, and they give us all the tools we need to make sure our instance is appropriately protected. So from access protection, multi-factor authentication, login hours, IP restrictions, these kind of just access, can people even log in from where they are and what time of day that is, on the devices that they're on, right? Limit mobiles, laptops, etc. Depending on what's appropriate for your business. Previously owned data. If you know, we're a data governance company, so we always look to some of the data classification things, and I'll probably talk about this more later because again, Salesforce gives you this feature to classify all your data, but it's not necessarily the easiest to work to do that. It's a lot of clicks to work your way through. But they give you those tools, and I will definitely mention this later. Is, if you're not classifying your data, you're not treating your data correctly, and so that's an important thing. One thing I'd like to make people aware of, and they know this because they're living it, is the permissions model in Salesforce is incredibly granular, which is great for fine control and positive in terms of security by design principles. But it's also very easy, as I mentioned earlier, to over-provision users or to understand why a user can see a record or an object sometimes even based on the layering and the mesh of permissions they've got. So it gives you a lot of tools. And some of them might not be the easiest to interpret, but it does essentially let you draw the perimeter boundary and then the data boundaries that you need as well.
Hey, there's some really good advice there. Thanks, Andrew. So let's move on and get clarity on who's actually responsible when it comes to Salesforce security. Connor, could you kick us off just by giving an overview of what the shared responsibility model is, please?
Yeah, of course. So for those who aren't familiar, the shared responsibility model is a premise under which most or all cloud providers operate, including Salesforce. And it means that Salesforce or your cloud provider will take care of things like network security, infrastructure security, and they give you the tools to have a secure deployment. But there's also aspects that fall onto the customer. So customers are responsible for rolling out tools like multi-factor authentication, all of those kind of granular data access controls, profiles, permission sets. Customers are responsible for rolling those things out correctly. And with Salesforce, customers are also responsible for making sure that the content that comes into your Salesforce environment is safe. So content meaning files, attachments, free-form text from partners, customers, etc. Making sure that those things are safe and not malicious. So the model just says that both the cloud provider and the customer are responsible for security, not just one or the other.
Thanks, Connor. And Andrew, turning to you, what's commonly overlooked here, please?
Oh, we've touched on a couple of the points, but yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of our time talking about the shared responsibility model as well, as do Salesforce to their credit, but it's still kind of misunderstood. I touched on data classification. I'll come back to that. I think that is the most overlooked item in terms of shared responsibility. I think it's either 85 or 87% of customers have not classified their data. And if you haven't, you're treating all your data the same. And the reality is that some bits of data, social security number, and date of birth, and even email addresses are fundamentally more sensitive than others. You may have HIPAA compliant data perhaps in free text fields because you haven't structured your system and then classified it appropriately. I forget the exact number, but even Service Cloud has something like 3,000 fields just out of the box, and then invariably there's been additions to that, objects and new fields, etc. The reality is only 5% of those are likely to be high risk, if that's what we see. But you have to take the time to identify those and determine then how you are going to treat those differently. And that is definitely on the customer side of the shared responsibility. But the reality is no platform, Salesforce included, is completely safe without diligent risk assessment and mitigation, right? Weighing up and indeed weighing up the appetite for risk that you have. And I know we talk more about the balance between agility and security shortly, but you do have to work that out.
Yeah, good points. I think the final thing I'll say here in terms of what's overlooked is sometimes who is responsible. So if you're working in the Salesforce team at your organization and you perhaps don't know who you would call if you had a security problem, that might be something that's overlooked, and actually is something that we commonly find within enterprise organizations. They have a number of cloud platforms, they've got a large security team, but who's actually responsible for security of Salesforce? So again, that's a really good way to start. Make sure that you've got someone who's responsible for security of Salesforce. Connor, Andrew, feel free to come back to me on this question. What advice can you share to customers to meet their security responsibilities?
So I think kind of what you had just alluded to, Graham, and this is something that Andrew and I also talked about in preparation for this webinar, but I think there's kind of Salesforce can sometimes not necessarily slip through the crack, but there's a push and pull between if it's a business owned application or IT owned application. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily go through those same review processes that things like email web browsers would. So right as you have things like email security advancing and users being trained on email security, sometimes other applications can fall behind. So but I think in terms of advice to kind of meet the responsibilities, of course, following the principles of secure by design, security needs to be kind of at the forefront of every process and application you're developing on Salesforce. And then, just creating that working model between business functions and IT and security, so that there's a process for those teams to work together. You have those frameworks in place to, continue to monitor security posture as your Salesforce environment inevitably changes, because Salesforce is always going to be changing. Most customers are always going to be changing the way they use Salesforce. So it's not necessarily a one and done security check, right? It has to be a continuous process that happens over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think security is a team sport, so this has to be a collaboration between Salesforce and security teams. So yeah, really important point that you make. Andrew, anything else that you wanted to add here?
No, just echo that. And we said, as Connor said when we were talking about this before, is the Salesforce team don't speak security generally, and the security team don't speak Salesforce. So finding that common ground and building the framework that Connor talks about early, where possible, is of key importance. There is business critical data in the CRM, and in the past that would have been in the realm of IT, and now it's in the realm of the business, and that is a kind of paradigm shift, but it's not new, but we're still adjusting to the security implications of that. So just taking the time to have those conversations.
Perfect. Yeah, good point. Really well made. So let's talk practically about some good security outcomes. Often security is seen as a disabler and stopping progress, but let's give some good examples of where security has enabled really good digital transformation on Salesforce. So Connor, can you give me some good customer success stories, please?
Yeah, of course. So one customer that I reference often is the Page Group. So the Page Group is one of the world's largest recruiting firms. I think they operate in nearly 40 or so regions around the world. And they're also a Salesforce power user. So Salesforce powers a lot of their recruiting infrastructure, and they're actually getting 60,000 resumes a day or CVs a day uploaded to their Salesforce environment. So to date, I think we've scanned upwards of 12 million pieces of unstructured data from them. And we've stopped or prevented over 50,000 potentially malicious files or harmful links from entering their Salesforce environment. So it's a huge amount of risk mitigation, but it's kind of what I had referenced earlier as well about, systematically taking the guesswork out for these recruiters in terms of, what is safe to open. There's obviously a huge influx coming into their system from perhaps partners, perhaps unknown applicants, things like that. But I think it's, putting these tools and systems in place to allow their users and their teams to take full advantage of the Salesforce platform, to do what it's great at doing, which is enabling processes like that.
Yeah, good story, good account. And I think that the risk there specifically for PageGroup and recruiters is not only do they not want to ingest any kind of malicious content, but those CVs are often being sent straight back out to their clients, right? If they've got a good candidate, they want to help place that candidate as soon as possible. And it's one thing receiving malware, but it's another thing to be spreading it back to clients and external, important stakeholders. So that's a great outcome that we're helping there with PageGroup. The other example I can give, which I think a lot of people online will be familiar with, is kind of using Salesforce for customer service. So one of our customers is Yahoo. They have up to 6 million external users using Service Cloud to raise cases. And Yahoo uses email to case extensively. And in the old days, when they just had emails coming in from their customers, there was a lot of phishing attempts. So they were looking to mitigate that risk on Salesforce and therefore use WithSecure to do that. And really importantly, one of their demands was they didn't want to have any software uploaded onto or installed more accurately on their end user devices, and with WithSecure they don't have to do that. So again, some really lightweight, fast security outcomes for PageGroup and for Yahoo there. So let's look at other outcomes that a lot of customers are looking to achieve. Compliance is often a reason for engaging with Salesforce and ecosystem partners like WithSecure and Own when it comes to security. Andrew, what must customers consider when it comes to compliance? What are your customers asking you for?
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. And I think one thing is, like, compliance is continuously evolving. In some ways, it's catching up with the new world of platform as a service and cloud computing. And regardless, it's always, we talked about evolving threats, the compliance will evolve as well. The other important thing about compliance is you can't just do something. You have to be able to prove that you did it. You have to be able to do it again, and you have to be able to document it ready for audit. But if we think about some of the more recent introductions like DORA or MY DFS, they talk about 3 specific things really. The first is being ransomware ready, so actually having a separate copy of data and being able to precisely and accurately use that to restore should you have a ransomware or an encryption attack or whatever shape that might take. The second is actually testing, and not just the technology. It's easy to test technology, right? But actually the people and the process as well. A lot of compliance, a lot of regulation gives obligations to the customer in terms of attacks. They have to notify people, they have to inform and be very open about what they're doing. So that process, making sure all the people within the process understand their role and responsibility, and that you have something documented that you can report up. And the final thing is industrialization. Connor spoke about this earlier. Security is not a one and done. Compliance is not a one and done exercise. So demonstrating that the principles of access, the security by design that you're putting in place is continuous, and that it's going with you on your CRM or your Salesforce evolution. As we keep saying, you keep changing your Salesforce, right? Even if you didn't, Salesforce keeps changing your Salesforce, right? 3 times a year. So you have to keep up to date with the moving picture that it is at all times. So those 3 things are what customers are asking for us. How do we industrialize things? How do we make sure our people and our processes work with the technology? And how do we know that we can recover from these external threats when they happen?
Thanks, Andrew. Really, really clear and understood. So speed is something that we increasingly see, and Salesforce helps customers go to market fast. But Connor, turning to you, how do you actually balance speed with security? They almost sound at odds with each other.
Yeah, and I think I had sort of alluded to this earlier, but like I said, one of the best parts of Salesforce is the fact that it's designed to enable efficient go-to-market operations. So, right, the key, like I mentioned earlier, is to taking advantage of that efficiency is to take the guesswork out of security. So, if you think about it today, right, most people here, your company probably regularly tests you for your security aptitude, with things like fake phishing emails, right? Companies have tools that will gamify this. They pay for those sorts of subscriptions to maintain that alert readiness. And that's made email, I think, a more difficult vector to target because users are more aware. But that's not necessarily the case with Salesforce and other go-to-market applications. So if I'm a service agent chatting with a customer, right, how do I know if the attachment that they sent is safe without clicking on it first? So my KPI as a service agent is likely around the number of cases or tickets that I've handled. So how do I balance that with potential risk? And I think the answer is putting, systems and tools in place to allow those teams to work as efficiently as they can, like the platform is designed for them to work, without needing to be constantly worried about that risk.
Yeah, good points. And I think the other point I would make around speed and security is often, if you're looking for speed, then it pays to look at a native security tool. So Salesforce, develops some great security products for Salesforce, right? Because why wouldn't they? They know the platform intimately. So again, you often get the real speed that you're looking for and the security outcomes that you want if you're looking for those native tools. There's some good advice, and certainly you could speak to your Salesforce account executive if you're interested in understanding what Salesforce has to offer in that regard, or again, look on the App Exchange as well. So next question is, what's the significance of visibility in Salesforce? Really important when it comes to security. Connor, what's your take here, please?
Yeah, I think when it comes to security, visibility is key to maintaining a strong security posture. And I can actually kind of highlight a customer story that we have here to drive this point home. So we had a Nordic customer come to us, I think maybe 1 day or 2 days into a cyber attack that forced them to actually shut down all go-to-market applications. So they had received a piece of malware, but they had no monitoring or visibility tools in place. So they actually didn't know what application it came from. And it took days for them to turn those tools back on. So if you're thinking about an attack like this, not just the reputational costs, regulatory fines, that loss in productivity and efficiency, right? It can be extremely costly not to have visibility into your environments and into your applications. So that's why, as part of our solution, we have a real-time audit log of every file or attachment that's being uploaded or downloaded from Salesforce, every link that's being clicked, so that you know exactly which users, which devices have interacted with something if an attack were to happen, right? And that's the kind of data and visibility that allows you to really act quickly in the event of an attack like this. And obviously that's can't happen without monitoring visibility tools in place.
Yeah, really good points. Next question to you, Andrew. What kind of proactive monitoring and controls do you actually recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to consider here. So firstly, you need to monitor access, right? Who is logging in and what are they doing once they are logged in? Being able to identify what's business as usual and what is unusual, and therefore perhaps wherein we spoke about some of the security controls that Salesforce offers. Secondly, what's happening in your setup? So are new endpoints being created? Is new code being introduced or changed? Are users being given elevated permissions, again, outside of what is ordinary? And that's something that Shield Event Monitoring can help with. You can define the policies that you want it to look for. And that's certainly, if you've got your CM in place, you can do some very effective reporting on that. And finally, what is happening with your data? So again, being able to differentiate between what is normal and abnormal. We use statistical outliers for this. So we build a model of what is generally happening on the day, what records are created or deleted or edited, and therefore we're able to identify what is abnormal and alert people to that when we see that type of activity. So it's three things again. It's the data, it's the access, and it's the setup that you need to be monitoring.
Yeah, all good advice. Thank you, Andrew. Excuse me. So here are some of the good security outcomes that we see. It's getting configuration correct, making sure that the speed of your security matches the speed that you need from your Salesforce instance, having visibility, protection, and control over any threats that you're seeing coming into your Salesforce environment, and also achieving compliance. Connor, Andrew, anything else you wanted to add there, please, today?
I think the only thing I would add is, just reiterate that it's a continuous process. It's good to implement plans and policies to make sure that these things don't fall by the wayside. But it's, you have a great platform to work with and a great, sound infrastructure to build on. So it's certainly possible to take advantage of the platform and do so securely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the workload and the business processes that go on Salesforce are unique to the company using it. So it's really about understanding those business processes and how they need to be protected. What are the potential risks with them? So again, I think, yeah, you're right that it's an ongoing process and it's specific and unique to each Salesforce customer. So just to summarize the conversation that Connor and Andrew and I have had today and leave you with some kind of key Salesforce security takeaways. Number one, be aware of the threats affecting all Salesforce customers, and that might mean looking at some really good Salesforce reports where security leaders and IT leaders have actually talked about the top security concerns that they have on Salesforce. Unsurprisingly, that's things around AI and ransomware and malware and such like, insider attacks as well. But also understand what are the threats that might be affecting your own Salesforce orgs right now. Do that self-analysis. Number two, have a Salesforce security owner in your organization who is responsible for meeting your unique security needs. That sense of it's not a one size fits all when it comes to security. It will be a posture that's really right and proper for your organization. And thirdly, you're not alone. You can talk to Salesforce and other partners across the ecosystem for additional help and advice. There's a wealth of security experts out there, and you can certainly tap into that should you want to do so. So from Connor, Andrew, and myself, thanks very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Andrew for question and answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Thank you, Andrew and Connor, as well. That was really interesting discussion. I would imagine that everyone listening in has taken a lot away from that. We've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm literally just gonna throw them out there, and whoever feels like answering them, feel free to take it on. The first one that we've got is, what role do you think implementation partners will play when it comes to security?
Yeah, I can answer that, Andrew. That's a good question. I think we just see implementation partners taking a more proactive role when it comes to security. Why is that? Because their customers are asking them more security questions, but I think they are having a point of view on security, in many instances developing services around that, so they're managing those security tools for their customers and just being able to best advise customers when it comes to security. So they're implementing secure and low risk deployments for their customers. That's what I see. And then you've got specifically, off the top of my head, implementation partners like PwC with actual security teams within their Salesforce practice, are real Salesforce security experts being able to help customers. So that's what I see.
Amazing, thanks for that, Graham. Right, the next question that we've got, it goes back to what you was saying, Andrew, a little bit around integrations. And is there a way integration should be properly set up for a secure connection when minimum access is given?
Yeah. So again, there's twofold. The first is the authentication and the security. And if we assume that that's secure, maybe you're using a plugin to, I don't know, NetSuite, right? Whatever, it doesn't matter on MuleSoft. We can assume that the transaction is secure. So then it is about the data access. And this is going to sound very glib and very easy, right? But when you get a new integration, it's the easiest thing in the world to just give admin reality. You need to take two approaches to the integration user. Firstly, what does it need to read? Secondly, what does it need to update? And take the time to get an object and field level dictionary of what that means. and then create a profile that's specifically, or a permission set, probably go permission set with the roadmap as it is on Salesforce, to just purely give those permissions. And I strongly suspect when you do that, you will have to iterate a few times to get it right. You will get failures on your integration because it can't update a field it needs, or it can't read a field it needs. But what you end up with there is a secure integration that is a much reduced vulnerability attack vector for you, because it can only do certain things that are within its control. It doesn't need admin access. So a couple of sweeping statements in my answer, and a lot of work, I'm afraid, but that to create it securely, that is the approach. What does it need to read? What does it need to update? Only grant those permissions.
Amazing, thank you for that. Right, the next question we've got is, what are some good monitoring tools that you've seen other orgs use? And I mean, there's been some examples of things like GearSet being used, but are there any tools that you guys have seen that you really like?
So I think from my perspective, it depends, of course, what you're hoping to monitor here. So right, our solution, we specialize in kind of monitoring unstructured data, files, attachments, URLs that are coming in and out of your Salesforce environment to make sure those things are safe. Tools like GearSet can, also monitor your Salesforce platform in different ways. And then you have things like Salesforce's, Shield Suite, trusted services. Event monitoring can also, of course, be a helpful tool in monitoring user activity, identifying anomalous behavior, like large exports of data and blocking those things in real time. So I think it just, there's different tools for different instances. So just depends exactly what you're hoping to monitor.
Yeah, I'd second event monitoring, and Connor said it really well earlier. Is they make, I'm sorry, Graham, I think it was you actually. Salesforce makes great security tools for the Salesforce platform, and they give you those to enable you, and in event monitoring. And if you get the policies correctly in that, it can be very precise on what you're monitoring and what you're notified about. Yes, GearSet, yes, own recover as well for metadata. Maybe your code is repository based. That gives you other options as well. But look to the platform, look to the trusted partners with Salesforce before you go custom. But yeah, good suggestions.
Yeah, I would echo that. Speak to Salesforce. They've got some, good security architects who'll be able to talk to you clearly about Salesforce's security tools, but also about other things in the App Exchange. So that's a good place to start.
Awesome, some really good examples there. Thanks, guys. Our next question that we've got in is, how do you recommend documenting security permissions and data? And then, like, for example, is there any sort of document type that people should be looking to use or anything like that?
I think that one's a bit tougher. I mean, I do, work with customers who have had success in doing regular audits of permission sets and really kind of creating permission set groups that are locked down, and they're very clear about what exact permissions are in those groups that are kind of approved for different groups of users. And they do, regular audits of those. So, there could kind of be that kind of process in place where you review every permission that is able to get into a permission set group, and then regularly on a monthly, quarterly basis review all of your users' permissions and make sure that there's nothing outside of those groups that have kind of been pre-approved and vetted. It's not necessarily a document, but kind of perhaps a policy or a process that might help with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say, I think trying to document Salesforce is kind of futile, because it's moving so fast all the time, and it's self-documenting to an extent as well, but it should certainly be your source of truth. So should you take snapshots of permissions or profiles or who sees what or whatever it might be, use Salesforce as your source of truth. Don't try and document it elsewhere, because it will be out of date by the time you've finished the document, and not viable for audit or indeed future action either. So concentrate on getting the data directly from Salesforce in a kind of snapshot form if you need that. It's going to depend on your industry and your geography to an extent exactly what you need to record and what you need to audit. But yeah, don't look to duplicate. I would say Salesforce as a source of truth for permissions.
Some really good advice. Thanks, guys. The next question is a little bit of a longer one. So I've had a concern with fake website queries for leads that have been able to bypass reCAPTCHA, things like that on the form. Is there a better way to prevent this and from any malicious links in email case submissions?
So the bypassing of the reCAPTCHA form is it's sort of a front end question that's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but to the second part of that question, in terms of scanning for malicious links that maybe come in via those forms, or like you said in the question, from email to case submissions, that's exactly what our cloud protection for Salesforce solution does. So we do scan web to lead forms if somebody's inputting a company website. Or email to case if they're including links and URLs in the body of those emails. Those are things that we scan, and we scan them every time a user clicks on them to make sure that we are preventing users from being taken to malicious sites via polymorphic links that initially appear safe and then after a few minutes redirect to a malicious site. So the second piece is something that we can definitely help with.
Yeah, and it's not my wheelhouse either, the first part, and for the second part, I would probably email Connor and ask his opinion. So yeah.
Good advice.
Awesome. Thanks for that one, guys. And last question that we've got is, can you recommend any good ways to test security settings by doing things like ethical hacking with a guest user, for example?
Ethical hacking, I like that.
White
I mean, there are certainly ways to test from a malware antivirus perspective. There are things like ICAR files, which are kind of industry standards in terms of trying to pass those through guest users, or different forms you have that feed into Salesforce and see if those things are successful, or if a user is able to download them to their device from Salesforce, is kind of like taking that test one step further. I think with guest user access too, if you have an Experience Cloud site, that's something where there's a lot of risk for data leakage and kind of some of those human errors that we had mentioned earlier. So making sure that if they are a guest user, they can't access any records, in those Experience Cloud sites, and just kind of testing, making sure that whatever you do have exposed there isn't is supposed to be available to all users in a Experience Cloud site, since this guest user wouldn't have been identified.
I guess I would add a couple of things here. I mean, our secure product has a who sees what, which would show for that guest user what access they've got and can see. That's not ethical hacking as such. But I think this is the nub of kind of what we've been talking about, where Salesforce and security are speaking different languages, and finding that common ground. A security team will be looking to OWASP. They'll be looking at top 10 and cross-site hacking and all the other risks that they are, and the security team aren't thinking about that. And that's, if there's nothing else to take away, it's that the security team and the Salesforce team should be speaking and finding a common ground, building the framework Connor spoke about earlier for, how do we keep this application secure whilst respecting the agility and speed that it gives us as well.
Awesome, amazing answers. Thanks, guys. Right, there is one last question that's come in, but I can answer this. Yes, this recording is going to be emailed to, as far as I'm aware, to everyone who signed up for the webinar. So even if someone wasn't able to make it today, they'll receive an email and they'll be able to watch it all back. But that looks like it's all it for the Q&A, so we can leave it there. So Graham, Connor, Andrew, thank you so much for your time this evening. Well, evening for me. I don't know where it is for everyone else. And yeah, is there any last words you want to add before we wrap up?
No, thanks everyone for watching. Really appreciate everyone's commitment. And yeah, you can get a free Salesforce content risk assessment from our website with secure.com/Salesforce. So yeah, that's the parting offer from us. And thanks again for watching.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in the